Mr. Sergeant at Arms.
Mr. Speaker, the Governor of Kansas awaits without.
Please admit the Honorable Mark Parkinson, Governor of the great state of Kansas.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, Minority Leaders Hensley and Davis, Cabinet officers, Mr. Chief Justice and your colleagues, elected officials, honored guests, and my fellow Kansans. For almost 150 years, 45 governors have had the great honor to report to this body on the state of the state. Now, during that time, we've had all kinds of crises. We've had financial booms and busts, we've been through 2 world wars, and we have faced countless natural disasters. And yet, despite that, every prior governor has declared that the state of our state was strong. They did so because they understood that you don't measure the state of a state by the crisis that it's in at the time. Instead, you measure the state of a state by the character and the quality of the people that live in it. Are they willing to pull together during tough times, stare down any challenges, and lend a helping hand to those that are in need? Mr. Speaker and Mr. President, I'm happy to report that this recession has once again tested the quality and character of the Kansas people. We have once again passed every test. On every measurement that matters, the state of Kansas has never been stronger. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't face any more challenges. This recession has been brutal, and it continues to fight against it. But my message to Kansans tonight is clear. We will not let this recession defeat us. In order for us to succeed, we've got to pull together and continue to fight. But we have to do it, because to give up in what I believe are the waning moments of this recession would cause incalculable damage to what we have built up here in Kansas. I'm so proud of the founders of our state and the vision that they had for this state. Those founders and the leaders that followed them executed on that vision and created the greatest state in the country. What I'm calling on the 165 of you to do tonight is to protect what our founding fathers and those leaders have built over the last 150 years. Now, you've heard me brag time and time again about our founding fathers, about the obstacles that they faced, the struggles that they overcame, and it is truly amazing. They shared a vision. If you go back and study the history of our state, you will see that they shared a vision of outstanding public schools, great universities, safe communities, and an economic climate that would allow all Kansans to prosper. Early on, they understood the importance of great universities. In 1863, just 2 years after we became a state, they formed Kansas State University. And this wasn't a one-time commitment. This is a commitment to higher ed that's lasted throughout our history. We went on to build 6 additional great universities, 19 community colleges, and 7 technical schools. The vision of our founders was clear. If you want to retain the best and the brightest in Kansas, you must build great universities. If you want to attract the best and the brightest from other states, you must build great universities. And if you want to build the labor force that will propel us into the future, you must build great universities. And they were right. Hundreds of thousands of Kansans have graduated from these schools and made Kansas what it is today. Now, along the way, we also learned that investing in higher ed was also great economic development. Ask yourself, why does the Animal Health Corridor exist? It doesn't exist because of any tax abatement that we offered any company. It exists because decades ago, this legislature made the commitment to Kansas State at such a level that it could develop a vet school. At the same time, Missouri was establishing a vet school, and a corridor developed between the two schools, and the rest is history. Scores of companies and tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. If this legislature had been tight-fisted decades ago and refused to fund higher ed, the Animal Health Corridor would never have existed. It is our 150-year commitment that made it possible. Think about National Cancer Institute designation at KU. Why do we have a chance? We have a chance because decades ago, this legislature funded higher ed to such a level that KU could develop a world-class medical school. If we'd been tight-fisted and refused to fund higher ed, National Cancer Institute designation would not be possible. It is our 150-year commitment that makes it possible. Think about the aircraft industry. Our greatest entrepreneurs, those in Wichita, made it happen, and they deserve the credit. But it is Wichita State and all the other great schools across this state that have provided the labor force that has made those entrepreneurs' dreams a reality. It is our 150-year commitment that made it possible. Make no mistake about it. Funding higher ed isn't just the right thing to do, it is great economic development. Now, the same can be said for our public schools, our elementary schools, our junior highs, and our high schools. If you go back and look at Kansas history, you'll see that clear back in the 1860s and 1870s, our founders, people like William Allen White and the leaders of that time, made a commitment to public education when other states were shying away from it. Their vision was that we needed to create literate citizens who would get jobs, become consumers, and move this state ahead. And it wasn't a one-time commitment. Our history is filled with 150 years of commitment, and in fact, funding public education and creating great schools has become an important part of what Kansas is all about. And it has also worked. We've created a world-class public school system. It is a system that is consistently ranked as one of the best in the country. It's a system whose graduation rates and test scores are consistently above the national average. It's a system that's given every child in this state a chance, and it has provided the great labor force that we dreamed of. Now, our founders did even more. On top of building great universities and great schools, they also built a great transportation system, a system that's now considered a model across the country. They built a great public safety system, a system that has kept our communities and neighborhoods safe. And they built a robust public safety net, a safety net for our elder and disabled, because they understood that the true measure of a society isn't how it treats the richest of the rich, it's how it treats those that are most in need. Now, along the way, there have been naysayers. All 150 years, there's been people that have run around, just like there's people right now that run around and say, you can't do all this without taxing the state out of business. And we know that they are wrong. We know that they are wrong because our leaders have developed this great state while keeping taxes in Kansas below the national average. The Tax Foundation every year does a study of the comparing tax levels from every state in the country. And in 2009, its findings were the same as they'd been many years before, that the tax burden in Kansas is below the national average, below. It's a remarkable accomplishment. Our founders and the leaders that followed them for 150 years built this great state, and yet did so in such a cunning and frugal way that we were able to keep our tax burden below the national average. Now, everything that has been built is at risk. It's at risk because this recession has devastated our state revenues. We've had to cut $1 billion. Now, like any entity, public or private, we had waste in state government. And that made the first $300 or $400 million in cuts relatively easy. But as the deficit grew and the cuts grew, we got way past the point of cutting waste, and we're now cutting into the bone. The last round of cuts, the cuts that I imposed in November, were brutal. Schools have closed, class sizes have increased, professors have been laid off. We've had to reduce the supervision of prisoners that are out on parole. We've had to cut Medicaid reimbursement. It's been very, very difficult. And now we face even a greater challenge. Before I talk about that challenge, I want to publicly thank all 165 of you for the way that you responded to last year's challenge. I asked you to set aside partisan differences, to forget that we were Republicans and Democrats, and instead just to come together as Kansans as we worked through the challenges that we had, and we did it. We avoided the partisan bickering that you see in almost every other capital in this country and that you see every single day in Washington, D.C., and we came together and we solved our problems. Well, this year it's more important than ever that we pull together, because this year the challenge is even greater. Now we face another $400 million budget hole. And this isn't $400 million that we need to get these programs back to where they used to be. We've got a $400 million budget hole just to fund these programs at their already incredibly reduced level. Now, I've spent hours looking at these budgets. Stacy would tell you I spent hundreds of hours looking at them. And I can't find $400 million that we can responsibly cut. If you can find responsible cuts, I'm open to looking at them. But let me repeat, as a person who's fiscally responsible, a person who has cut more money out of the Kansas budget than any Kansan in history, there isn't $400 million that we can responsibly cut. Now is the time to stop cutting aid to education, to stop cutting aid to public safety, and to stop cutting aid to our elderly and disabled. Thank you. Here's my plan to do it. We need to raise two taxes. First, we need to raise the cigarette and tobacco tax from 79 cents a pack to the national average of $1.34. This will not only raise additional revenue, it will also reduce teen smoking, because study after study shows that if you make cigarettes expensive, kids are less likely to buy them. And second, for a temporary period of 36 months, we need to raise the state sales tax by 1 cent. This 36 months will allow us to fund our programs at minimally acceptable levels while we work our way out of this recession. And then at the end of the 36 months, I propose that we roll the increase back, retaining just 0.2 of 1 cent that we keep to craft a modest but necessary highway plan. Now, this is by no means a big spending budget. Most agencies would still be forced to live under the dramatically reduced budgets that they are currently living with. But we would be able to make some modest enhancements. We'd be able to restore a small part of the cuts that we've made to public education and to our universities. We'd be able to restore the money that we've had to cut out of the supervision of parolees that are released from prison. And we'd be able to restore the Medicaid cuts that I made in November so that the poorest in Kansas would have access to doctors, to hospitals, and to nursing homes. The alternative is just not acceptable. If we have to cut $400 million from the already reduced levels that we have, I will tell you that every school in this state, every school that you represent, will be hurt. Some will close. Others will combine classes. Class sizes will reach a level that it will become very difficult to teach. Every university, technical school, community college will be hurt. National Cancer Institute designation will be in jeopardy. There won't be any money to supervise prisoners that are let out on parole. The Medicaid cuts would have to stand, and budgeting for 2012 and beyond would be extremely difficult. Now, I know there's been discussion of other ways to come up with the $400 million, closing sales tax exemptions. There's also the possibility that the federal government will give us some additional funds and help us out in this situation. I want you to know that I am open to all options. I encourage you to actively look at all possibilities over the next 90 days as a responsible way to fill this $400 million gap. But what I am not open to are further crippling cuts to our critical state programs. Our ancestors fought too hard to build this state to what it is right now. And now it's our turn. It's our turn to fight. And it is a fight worth fighting. Now, if all we did this year was protect what our ancestors had built over the last 150 years, that would be a remarkable accomplishment. But I think we can do even better than that. I think we can make this an historic session by not only protecting what we have, but also building for the future. And I ask you to consider 3 policy initiatives that I suggest that we enact this year. First, let's ramp up the fight against cancer by enacting a statewide public smoking ban. It's time to do it. 24 states, including North Carolina, have enacted a public smoking ban. If North Carolina, the largest tobacco-producing state in the country, can enact a public smoking ban, surely we can do it in Kansas. Now, let me be very clear about this. I don't want to see a watered-down public smoking ban, one that's written by the tobacco industry and full of loopholes and isn't a real ban. 75% of Kansans want a real public smoking ban, and I'm asking you to give it to them. Second, let's continue to move renewable energy policy forward. We have made such remarkable progress in this area. 2008 was all about bringing wind farms to the state, all across the state. In 2009, we had success in the area of transmission and in bringing green jobs to Kansas. Let's make 2010 the year where we truly become a national leader. I've asked Lieutenant Governor Finley to head a sub-cabinet policy team that will make certain that we take advantage of every opportunity to bring transmission, wind farms, and green jobs to Kansas. We are the 3rd windiest state in the country. We are in the middle of the country. It is our destiny to lead this country in renewable energy, and Lieutenant Governor Finley and his team will make it happen. Finally, let's make sure that we never end up in this mess again. You know, there are a lot of reasons for the financial problems that we have right now, and we need to learn from each of them. One of them is that we came into this last fiscal year with no reserve fund. That is not acceptable. Downturns are inevitable. Every business and family realizes that, so those that can create an emergency fund. It's time that we did the same thing. I'm asking you to adopt the Vrattle-Kelly constitutional amendment that would require the state in good years to deposit money in an emergency fund so that in down years, we don't have to face the decisions that we faced this year. It is time to put the state's fiscal house in order and prepare for a solid financial future. Now I want to tell you why I'm so optimistic about the future. I've studied recessions and depressions, and particularly the impact in Kansas, and what happens in a recession is that people give up. And when they give up, then depressions become possible. My message to Kansans tonight is this: don't give up. Don't give up. There are just too many reasons for genuine optimism. We're all concerned about jobs and unemployment, and our current unemployment rate is not acceptable. The good news is that the Department of Commerce has had success after success in bringing new companies and jobs to the state. Unfortunately, we've had a hard time keeping up with current employers who have found it necessary to lay people off. I want everyone that's unemployed tonight to know that the Department of Commerce and our office, and I know this legislature, won't stop fighting until every Kansan has a job. And it shouldn't be long. The changes that are taking place in the world are very favorable to Kansas. At our core, we are an export state. We export airplanes, agricultural products, and energy. And as the emerging markets grow, and they are still growing even in this recession, in China and in Brazil and in India, as they grow, demand for our exports will grow. 700 million people in the emerging markets will become middle class in the next 20 years, and no state will benefit more than Kansas. But we can only benefit if we beat this recession, if we refuse to give up, if we protect what we have and prepare for the future. Now, last year, I gave you my vision for Kansas in the year 2030. Despite this recession, that vision is fully intact. I told you that by the year 2030, our aviation, agricultural, and energy sectors would be strong. NBAF will have been built, and the animal health corridor will be robust. I told you that KU will have achieved National Cancer Institute designation and will be seen as a leading research institute in this country. Our other universities, community colleges, and technical schools will be doing great as well. I told you that a renewable energy corridor would spring up between Wichita and Salina and employ thousands of Kansans as they make the devices to provide clean energy across the country. I told you that we'd have wind farms all throughout western Kansas. The transmission would be built to bring it to eastern Kansas and beyond. And I told you that we would be more diverse. We will have more Hispanic Americans and more Asian Americans. And unlike other states that foolishly shun these populations, we will recognize them for their true value, accept them as Kansans, and they will become an even more important part of the Kansas story. I'm more optimistic about these predictions than ever before, because look at what we've just accomplished in the last year. In the last year, we've received needed approvals for transmission lines. In the last year, we exceeded our goal of 10% renewable power by 2010, and more wind farms are being announced all the time. In the last year, the first two companies located factories in the renewable energy corridor. And this year will be the year that we will start construction of MBAF. And I want to personally invite the governor of Texas, Governor Perry, to come to Manhattan, Kansas and participate in the groundbreaking. But for all of this to happen, we have to protect what we have and fight for the future. And I want to close on a personal note. 28 years ago, I started law school at KU and I met the love of my life, Stacy. Second day of law school, we met. Stacy had grown up in West Wichita. She went to Goddard Public Schools, KU for her undergrad, and then KU for law school. I grew up in Northeast Wichita. Went to Wichita State for my education degree, and then ultimately KU Law School. And we fell in love. And we did something that the advisors will tell you never to do. We got married our second year of law school. We had very few material possessions. We were broke. In fact, we lived in a mobile home. But we had each other, and we had big dreams for the future. And lo and behold, every one of those dreams came true. We practiced law together side by side and had a blast doing it. And then we started a business in an area that we are passionate about, taking care of the elderly. And we've been rewarded in many different ways, many times over than we would ever have thought possible. And we've had three great kids, and we love them all desperately. We've seen the world, and we've lived a life beyond what we could possibly have imagined from that mobile home in Lawrence. Now, I tell you this not to boast, particularly during a recession. I would never want to boast. I tell you this because we want to make sure that future generations have the same opportunity that we have had, the opportunity to live the American dream without ever leaving Kansas. Stacy and I have been able to live this life because decades ago, legislators in the very place that you are tonight made the decision that it was smart to fund public education in our universities. Stacy and I have been able to live this life because growing up in Wichita, you didn't have to be rich to go to a good public school. We were able to live this life because growing up in Kansas, you didn't have to be rich to go to a great university. And what I'm asking you to do tonight is to give that same opportunity to our children and our children's children, the same opportunity that Stacy and I and everybody in this room has had, the opportunity to live the American dream without ever leaving the state. Now, generations from now, historians will look back on how we handled the greatest recession since the Great Depression. You have the opportunity to astonish them. You can astonish them because by your actions this session, you can not only protect what we have built up over the last 150 years, but while everybody in all these other states is panicking, you can actually prepare this state for the future. I ask you tonight to seize that opportunity to astonish the historians and write a chapter in Kansas history that we can all be proud of. Thank you all very much. God bless you. God bless the United States, and God bless the great state of Kansas.